True evangelical faith cannot lie dormant, but spreads itself out in all kinds of righteousness and fruits of love. It clothes the naked, it feeds the hungry, it comforts the sorrowful, it shelters the destitute, it aids and consoles the sad. It does good to those who do it harm. These are the words of Menno Simons, and these are words that I grew up with. I grew up hearing, seeing, and reading them, and I knew that a fundamental part of the Christian faith is not to just believe it in one's spirit or think it through intellectually, but to actually have my faith impact my hands and my feet by living a life full of love. These words are part of what went into my decision as I contemplated getting a COVID-19 vaccine. My name is Carolyn Clausen. I'm a therapist at Connexus Counseling, and I'm a speaker at Wired for Connection. I write and I speak on relationships and connection to self and others. Some of you may have heard me sometime on 680 CJOB with Hal Anderson on Thursday afternoons. What many of you might not know about me is that I'm also a person of deep faith. I attend the Meeting Place downtown Winnipeg, and I'm actually involved in the teaching team there and have opportunity to look at how matters of life, love, and redemption intersect with faith in Jesus. I'm also the grandchild of people who fled the USSR with only the clothes on their backs. Broken promises from government, the inability to practice their faith, and religious persecution made being a follower of Jesus literally life-threatening for them. I grew up listening to stories of death camps, executions, raping, and pillaging that made it necessary for my grandparents to leave everything they had to immigrate here to Canada. Many Mennonites are just 1 or 2 generations away from a government system that was coercive, cruel, and even brutal. And so I understand when there's mistrust about vaccines because of authority and mistrust of authority, things like that. And as I've been preparing to think about doing some writing around vaccine hesitancy, I'm aware that people's Christian faith is impacting their decisions in both ways. Maybe to get it or maybe to not get it and to stay away from it. And I wanted to let you know a little bit about how I think through vaccine getting it and vaccine hesitation. I wanted to let you know about how I have been thinking about it theologically and some of the studying and reading and thinking that I've been doing. So it's about 5 points. First of all, God created us in God's image, which means that we as humans, we're created to be smart and innovative and creative. God invites His creation to collaborate in the work of the world. And I celebrate the God-given talents and knowledge of scientists and medical researchers. My husband is alive because his appendix was removed with modern surgery, and he has a metal plate in his leg that helps him walk because it was so badly fractured at one point. I believe that vaccinations are one of the ways that God wants to improve our lives, and I love that scientists have collaborated with God to have that vaccines exist. Secondly, trust and risk. Although the vaccine has been tested and it rides the history of the success of other vaccines, something like polio doesn't exist really anymore because of the polio vaccine. There is concern amongst people about trusting this vaccine, and it can just seem better to say, we are going to put our trust in God and not in the vaccine. But it reminds me, though, of the story of the guy who's on the roof of his house in the flood, who turns away the guy in the rowboat, the guy in the speedboat, and the helicopter, who comes to whisk him off to safety, saying that he'd rather wait for God to save him. When he drowns and gets to heaven, he asks God, "Why didn't you save me?" And God says, "I sent you a rowboat and a speedboat and a helicopter." Maybe God is trying to help us. And you know, there is risk with a vaccine. There are some unknowns, but there are also well-proven knowns that make the risk worth it. I gave birth to 2 wonderful boys after I gave birth to stillborn twins. When I was pregnant with my oldest living son, I could get a procedure that would potentially allow for a live birth. But undergoing the procedure itself carried a 20% risk of ending the pregnancy. And frankly, that seemed terrifyingly high. But the risk of not getting it was much higher. The risk of serious complications from the vaccine is a small fraction of just 1%. So a small fraction of 1%, so way less than 1%, God calls us to trust Him, which for me means placing that unknown risk of the vaccine into God's hands. Life really is full of risk, and that's what our faith does, is it helps us to trust in God in this life of risk. Suspicion and mistrust. Those who have experienced religious persecution, like Mennonites, in their past are justified to be suspicious and wonder when it might happen again. I'm a therapist, and that's an expected and very normal response to trauma. It is tempting to be suspicious of government when school and business closings are mandatory and the consequences are so devastating. And we have in our history that government can't be trusted. The Mennonite history of abuse by government in past generations is real, without a doubt. And there are ways in which the restrictions can touch those old pains when the officials say schools must close, churches must not gather, you cannot sit in the coffee shop together. It does feel controlling because it is. And so old hurts can be triggered and suspicions can rise up. That's a part of trauma too. We're being triggered. But there's a difference. The restrictions now their primary intentions are designed to save lives, not harm them, and to help us be healthier rather than to oppress and control us. Those restrictions are to create conditions of freedom in the future by slowing the spread of the virus today. The request to get a vaccine is done to be able to help save lives and increase our freedoms soon. The people, they were suspicious of Jesus too. They didn't like the changes that He made. The religious of the day were suspicious of Jesus because He broke the rules. They failed to understand that when He broke convention, it wasn't to harm people, but to help them. Jesus' mandate was love, and so He challenged and changed the system when it didn't serve love. So although it might feel similar internally when health policy mandates restrictions because of the lingering suspicions from old and painful wounds, the intentions about where those restrictions come from are completely the opposite. And so we have to be able to work our way through those fears that we have internally. 4, service. When I read about Jesus and the way He consistently and persistently looked for those that were disadvantaged and marginalized and looked to bring them into the center of the circle, looked to heal them, I'm humbled by the way that Jesus loved others, even at His own expense. Let me read from Philippians 2, and I'm going to read from the Message version. It says this: if you have gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if His love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other, love each other. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Verse 5, think of yourselves the way Jesus Christ thought of Himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of Himself that He had to cling to the advantage of that status no matter what. Not at all. Having become human, He stayed in this incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, He lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. I got my vaccine because it will make the world safer for the elderly and for the sick. It will make it safer for people of color who are disproportionately represented in the service industry, and they have to keep working on the front lines because they need to get a paycheck, and so therefore they are at greater risk. It is part of my effort to become more and more like Jesus that I get the vaccine by seeing them and by serving them. 5, love. In Matthew 25, there is a story where the king says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was homeless and you gave me a room. I was shivering and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you stopped to visit. I was in prison and you came to me. Then those sheep are going to say, Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to see you? And then the king will say, I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. We get the vaccine out of love. We wait our turn to make sure others who need it more get it first, but when it's our turn, we get it as a tangible way to love God. So that one day He's able to say, I was on the front lines and you got the vaccine to protect me. So I'm kind of thinking that if Menno Simons was alive in 2021, he might have said, true evangelical faith clothes the naked, feeds the sick, and protects the vulnerable by getting vaccinated. Thanks for listening.